It never begins with crisis. It begins with confidence. The numbers rise, markets hum, and governments assure us that debt is just a tool. But somewhere, quietly, the balance breaks. A nation borrows to survive. Another borrows to grow. And soon, every empire owes more than it owns. The illusion holds until someone asks the forbidden question. If every country is in debt, then who holds the ledger? Who collects the interest on the world itself? Picture this. It's 3 a.m. in Beirut, 2019. A software engineer named Rami stands outside a bank that has held his life savings for 15 years. The doors are locked. The ATM screen flickers with an error message. Inside, security guards avoid eye contact through bulletproof glass. Rami's money, his family's future, everything he worked for has vanished overnight. Not stolen, not lost. Simply frozen by institutions he trusted completely. And here's the strangest part. The Lebanese government owes massive debts to creditors around the world. The banks owe money to depositors like Rami. But somewhere in this chain of obligations, someone is getting very, very rich. This is empire economics, where money and power collide in ways that reshape entire civilizations. And today's mystery runs deeper than any single country or crisis. If every nation on earth is drowning in debt, if governments owe a combined $102 trillion with no intention of ever paying it back, then who exactly holds the other end of these invisible chains? The answer will surprise you, because the global debt system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, but not for the people you might think. Let's start with a number that should make your head spin. Global government debt has exploded by $42 trillion in just the past decade. That's not a typo. Every single day, governments worldwide add roughly $3 billion to their collective debt pile. The United States leads with $36 trillion. China follows with $16 trillion. Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France. Every major economy is leveraged to the hilt, borrowing money at a pace that would make a gambling addict blush. But here's where it gets interesting. There's actually more debt in the world than there is money in circulation. Think about that for a moment. If every dollar, euro, yen, and yuan were gathered together, it still wouldn't be enough to pay off what governments owe. The ratio ranges from nearly 2 to 1 in Japan to almost 5 to 1 in Denmark. This isn't an accident. It's the mathematical foundation of how modern money works. When banks create loans, they simultaneously create both the money and the debt. But here's the catch that most people never realize. The interest on that debt is never created. So from the moment any loan is made, there's always more debt than money to pay for it. This fundamental asymmetry means that somewhere in the system, someone must always default, or new debt must constantly be created to keep the machine running. So who benefits from this seemingly impossible arrangement? The answer lies not in what we owe, but in who we owe it to. Let's follow the money. In the United States, about 78% of government debt is held by domestic institutions. The Federal Reserve owns nearly $5 trillion worth of treasury bonds. Think about that. The Federal Reserve, which has the power to create dollars out of thin air, uses that created money to buy government debt, then collects interest payments from taxpayers. It's a closed loop that generates profits from the very act of money creation. Banks hold another massive chunk. They pay depositors an average of 0.4% on savings accounts, while the government pays them over 4% for the privilege of borrowing their money. That spread, hitting modern highs in recent years, represents a $1 trillion windfall that flows directly from taxpayers to financial institutions. Your tax dollars pay interest to banks, who then pay you a fraction of that return on your deposits. But the domestic holdings are just the beginning. Foreign governments and institutions own roughly $9 trillion of American debt. Japan leads with over $1 trillion, followed by China with $800 billion, and the United Kingdom with $700 billion. These aren't charity investments. They're strategic positions that generate guaranteed returns while allowing these nations to manipulate their own currencies for trade advantages. Consider Japan's strategy. By holding massive amounts of American Treasury bonds, Japan earns steady interest payments funded by American taxpayers. But there's a deeper game at play. Those holdings help keep the dollar strong relative to the yen, making Japanese exports more competitive in global markets. It's a double win: guaranteed profits from American debt, plus a trade advantage that benefits Japanese manufacturers. In 2024 alone, the United States paid $230 billion in interest to foreign creditors. That's nearly $1 billion every working day, flowing from American taxpayers to institutions and governments around the world. This isn't aid or charity, it's rent. Rent paid for the privilege of using money that, in many cases, was created specifically to be lent back to the borrower. The private investment world has turned government debt into one of the most lucrative asset classes in history. Mutual funds hold nearly $4 trillion in government bonds. Pension funds control another $3 trillion. Insurance companies, hedge funds, and private wealth managers have parked trillions more in what they consider the safest investment on earth. Government debt that will never be repaid, but will generate interest payments forever. Here's where the story gets personal. Social Security trust funds hold nearly $3 trillion in government bonds. Military pension funds control another $1.5 trillion. These retirement systems don't invest in productive businesses or innovative technologies. They park retiree money in government debt, earning returns that come directly from current taxpayers. It's a system where today's workers pay interest to yesterday's workers, mediated by a government that borrows from both. State and local governments join this cycle by holding another $2 trillion in federal bonds. Cities and counties lend money to the federal government, then receive back interest payments funded partly by federal grants to those same cities and counties. The money circulates in loops within loops, each transfer generating fees and profits for the institutions that facilitate the movement. But what happens when this system faces real pressure? When confidence wavers or economic shocks threaten the delicate balance? History shows us that these moments don't destroy the system, they concentrate its benefits even further. During the 2008 financial crisis, wealthy investors flocked to Treasury bonds as a safe haven, while ordinary Americans lost homes, jobs, and retirement savings. The flight to safety drove government borrowing costs to historic lows, essentially subsidizing the government's response to a crisis caused by the same financial institutions that profited from the aftermath. The COVID pandemic repeated this pattern on an even larger scale. The Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars to purchase government and corporate bonds, driving asset prices higher while millions of Americans struggled with unemployment and business closures. Those with investment portfolios saw massive gains. Those without saw their purchasing power erode through inflation. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth about modern debt. It's not designed to be repaid because repayment would destroy the very foundation of our financial system. Government bonds serve as collateral for international trade, backing for bank reserves, and the bedrock of retirement systems worldwide. If governments actually paid off their debts, the global economy would lose its most trusted financial instrument. Instead, debt becomes a subscription service. Governments issue new bonds to pay off old ones, rolling over obligations indefinitely while interest payments flow like rent to bondholders. The principal becomes irrelevant. The interest stream becomes the product. And who controls this product? Not the taxpayers who fund it, not the citizens who guarantee it with their future labor. The benefits flow to institutions with the capital to purchase bonds, the sophistication to navigate global markets, and the patience to collect steady returns from government promises. But this is only the beginning of our story, because understanding who profits from government debt is just the first layer of a much deeper system. The real power lies not just in owning government bonds, but in controlling the mechanisms that create, trade, and value debt itself. The banks that facilitate these transactions don't just move money, they multiply it. Every government bond purchase creates a cascade of derivative instruments, credit default swaps, and repo agreements that can amplify a single $1 trillion debt issuance into 10 times that amount in financial products. These instruments generate fees at every layer, turning government borrowing into a manufacturing process for financial profits. At the center of this web sits an institution most people have never heard of, but that quietly shapes the global economy every single day. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Known as the Central Bank for Central Banks, the BIS coordinates monetary policy between nations and sets the rules for international banking. When you wonder who really controls global debt, the answer often leads back to this unassuming building where representatives from 60 central banks meet to decide how money flows between countries. The BIS doesn't just observe these flows, it profits from them. Through a complex system of currency swaps and international lending facilities, the BIS earns returns on the very mechanisms that allow countries to manage their debt crises. When nations need emergency funding, they don't just borrow from markets. They borrow from other central banks through BIS-coordinated systems that generate fees and interest for the institution facilitating the rescue. This reveals something profound about modern debt. It's not just that every country owes money, it's that the institutions managing these debts have created a parallel economy where financial instruments based on government borrowing generate more wealth than the underlying government activities themselves. A bond backed by American taxpayers becomes the foundation for dozens of financial products, each generating profits for sophisticated investors, while the original taxpayers see only the obligation to service the debt. Consider what happens when a pension fund in Norway buys American Treasury bonds. The Norwegian fund earns interest paid by American workers. But that's just the beginning. The fund then uses those bonds as collateral to borrow additional money, which it invests in corporate bonds, real estate, and stock markets around the world. The American government debt becomes a multiplier, allowing foreign institutions to leverage American taxpayer obligations into global investment strategies. So who's getting rich from global debt? The answer isn't hidden in shadows or secret meetings. It's written in the financial statements of every major bank, pension fund, and central bank on Earth. The system works exactly as designed, transferring wealth from those who work to those who own the instruments of debt itself. Understanding this flow doesn't create fear, it creates clarity. And clarity, as history shows, is the first step toward financial wisdom. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. If you enjoy learning how history and money intertwine, subscribe to Empire Economics for more untold stories.